Hi class, so the last part of chapter 3 about the cell cycle. Now this part is about how the cells reproduce. All living things are made of cells, and the other thing is that all cells come from other living cells. So all of us as humans, we start as a single cell. So as an adult, you have, they're not, and nobody sat down and counted every cell in our body, but they estimate, and there's over 1 billion cells, maybe 1 trillion cells in your body, if you can imagine. Just an astronomical number, and no way that you could ever count all those cells. And they're constantly changing, and some are dying, and they're being replaced. So we have this constant cell cycle, constant building up and breaking down going on all the time inside our body. But we all started as a single cell. That cell became 2 cells, and then 4, and then 8, and et cetera, until we became who we are today. It's a pretty amazing process. It all comes down to what we call the cell cycle. This is the life of a cell. And it's similar to the life of an organism itself. So if you think about, so you start as a baby, you grow and mature, and then you reproduce and produce offspring, and then those offspring will grow and mature and then reproduce, and the cycle just continues. The cell is the same way, and we're going to look at the stages of that. Something to understand though is that this is a balance. So there's constantly cells being produced in our body, and there are also cells that are dying, I guess, being gotten. Some we are causing to die. We call that apoptosis, when we are triggering the cells to basically destroy themselves. And that could be for a number of reasons. If something happens so that the cell's not working correctly, or if it's an old cell, cells have a lifespan, and so then it'll go through this apoptosis and pass on. But then it'll be replaced by other cells that are being produced through the cell cycle. And this is all controlled by signaling and hormones and different processes within our body. There are some cells in our body that do not go through the cell cycle. In other words, they get to that point where they're mature, and then they just continue their life until we pass on. And some examples of that: muscle cells. So the number of muscle cells you have in your body right now, it's kind of what you got. They can get bigger, they can get smaller, but you don't. When you're working out and things, you're not adding muscle cells. You're just adding proteins to those muscle cells so they get bigger. Same thing with nerve cells. You've probably heard that before. The number of brain cells you have right now, that's what you've got, and you're slowly losing them over time. So really, those types of cells and some others don't actively reproduce within our body. The process of cell reproduction is called mitosis, and the part of the cell cycle when the cell is not reproducing is called interphase. Comparing this to our life cycle, our own life cycle, so we start as an infant and we grow to maturity. In that time, we're not reproducing; we're just growing, developing, and we're living our life. We call that would be the same as interphase in the cell cycle. And then when we get to the reproductive stage, that's mitosis, or mitotic stage. So we have interphase and we have mitosis. So in interphase, you can see what's happening here. So the cells are basically getting ready to reproduce. In order to reproduce, we need 2 copies of the DNA. That's one of the major focuses of cell reproduction, is replicating the DNA, so we have those 2 copies and then putting it into 2 new cells. We have to have double of all the organelles, of all the proteins, all this stuff has to be prepared, and so all of that happens during interphase. Here's a drawing of the cell cycle. Everything in purple is interphase. This is our growth and development stage, and then this stuff in blue is mitosis, and then we have cytokinesis, which is the actual division of the cell. Notice that interphase, there are some different parts. The most important part is the S phase, arguably the most important part, because that's when DNA is replicated. The other 2 phases, G1 and G2, are called growth phases, and that's where the cell is doing all the other things it needs to prepare to reproduce. As it's going through the cell cycle, as it's growing and developing, a cell gets to a point where it has to make a choice here. Either that cell will go through cell signal death, if it's an old cell, or it can just continue functioning. Maybe it's not able to reproduce, but it can still function, or maybe it never does reproduce, like muscle cells. Then it can go into kind of this waiting phase, and it just lives its life out, or it can continue to move through division and produce another cell. We're going to briefly look at each of these phases and what's happening in each of these. So these are the stages of mitosis that's going to happen. Cytokinesis is when the cytoplasm divides, that's when the cell actually divides, and then there's mitosis, division of the nucleus. We're going to look at the different phases. So there are 4 phases: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. And this is what happens in each. So what you guys need to know are just kind of the general aspects of each of these phases. Remember, this is just during mitosis. This is just the division of the cell, division of the cytoplasm. Division of the cell, not the cytoplasm. This is really looking at what's happening with that DNA as the cell is reproducing. So in prophase, the first thing that has to happen is the nucleus has to disappear, because the DNA is in the nucleus. At this point, the DNA has already been replicated. So the nucleus disappears, and we have these chromosomes within that are forming within the nucleus as the chromatin, as the DNA is in chromatin form, and now it's condensing into chromosomes. And so they start to appear as the nucleus disappears. And then the other thing is we have these things called spindle fibers. These are proteins that grow from the cell, from the edges of the cell, from the poles of the cell, and they attach to the chromosomes, and they're going to be what is going to pull the chromosomes apart when we get to that part. The second, let me skip here, then the second is metaphase. In this one, the spindle is now attached to the chromosomes, and chromosomes all line up right down the center of the cell. The third phase is anaphase. So in anaphase, the spindle fibers start to shorten, and they start to pull those chromosomes to opposite sides of the cell, and they also start to push the cell and elongate the cell as well, so that it can split into the middle. And then we have telophase. In telophase, it's kind of the opposite of prophase. The chromosomes decondense into chromatin, spindle fibers disappear, nucleus reappears, and then the cell can then proceed to cytokinesis, and then it can carry out its functions. And then cytokinesis, this is when the cytoplasm actually divides and you end up with 2 cells. This begins during anaphase and then continues through the end of telophase, and then you have the 2 new cells. A cleavage furrow forms. I'll show you kind of what that looks like as we look through the pictures of mitosis and meiosis. Sorry, just mitosis. We're not doing meiosis right now. I'm sorry about that. Just mitosis. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go look at the pictures here and some drawings of what's happening. This is from your book. This shows the different phases. So we focused on prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. The book adds in here early prophase, early metaphase. Those are just extensions of these other steps, because really the cell doesn't go through these steps. These are steps that we have, as people, we've designated within this cell cycle so that we can understand a little bit more of what's going on here. So during prophase, so we'll just kind of group these together. Notice the nucleus is starting to break apart, starting to fragment, and in these areas here, this is where the spindle fibers are going to start forming as these areas move to opposite sides of the cell. And then notice the DNA is starting to condense down into chromosomes. This is what chromosomes look like, kind of this X-shaped structure. So now the nucleus is fully dissolved, the chromosomes have appeared, and the spindle fibers are coming out, reaching out to grab onto the chromosomes. And then into early metaphase, now they've grabbed onto the chromosomes. Notice spindle fibers, one from each side, comes and attaches to the chromosome, and then it pulls them to the center. So by metaphase, all of the chromosomes are lined up down the center of the cell. Notice that at this point, the chromosomes are made of 2 parts. It's an X-shaped because they've been duplicated. So each arm of this X shape is a copy of the other arm. So the 2 arms are identical to each other. We call those sister chromatids. So one chromosome is made up of 2 sister chromatids. One chromosome is made up of 2 sister chromatids. And then the spindle fibers are attached on each side. So during anaphase, the chromosomes are going to get pulled apart, or even a better way to say it, the sister chromatids are going to be pulled apart, and it becomes 2 separate chromosomes. So the sister chromatids are getting pulled apart, 2 separate chromosomes. And then the cleavage furrow. Here's the cleavage furrow that's forming. So notice that it started to form in anaphase, and then by telophase it's forming. In telophase the nucleus reforms, the chromosomes decondense, and then the cleavage furrow is going to continue as cytokinesis snaps this cell right in two. And there we go, that's the cell cycle. Here's another picture. This actually is these are under the microscope of what these cells actually look like, not a drawing. So here you can see prophase, the nucleus is starting to break apart, you see the chromosomes starting to form. Metaphase, the chromosomes lined up down the center of the cell, you can see the spindle fibers, kind of cool. See those spindle fibers there. Anaphase, notice how the sister chromatids are getting pulled apart. And then during telophase, now it's cytokinesis is happening, we have our chromosomes decondensing, we can't really see them anymore, and it's going back into the nucleus. And there you go, so that is the cell cycle. That's how cells reproduce. It's how we end up with, so in this case, we end up with two cells that are identical to each other. So one cell starts with 46 chromosomes, we end up with two cells that have 46 chromosomes. This is the process our body uses to grow, to repair cells that have been lost. All of those sorts of things are happening in this cell cycle. So hopefully you enjoyed that. This wasn't a long video. Look through this information in the book. If you have any questions, let me know.